Today we're going to be looking at Pope Benedict, ex-Pope Benedict XVI's essay on paedophilia and sexual abuse. It's going to be very interesting. Somehow in his very clever mind, with all his philosophical and theological training, he came to the assertion that paedophilia is because of the absence of God. If paedophilia is the absence of God and the Vatican is covering everything up, i.e. it's engaging in paedophilia, then obviously God doesn't exist in the Vatican, which is very strange considering that the Vatican is the most holy place in the world, after, of course, Mecca. And I was just wondering how they managed to lose God. Maybe the food wasn't good enough. Maybe God was just unhappy. Maybe he wanted more lamb. Maybe the lamb didn't come with mint sauce. I don't know. But let's take a look and find out. The former Pope, Benedict, he asserted that paedophilia reached such proportions because of the absence of God. Well, I'm really sorry, but I just don't think that a pope should have that little faith in people, that because of an absence of God, somehow everyone resorts to paedophilia. Not to crime like stealing, theft, or other minor issues, but straight away, the absence of God automatically leads someone straight to abusing children. People are not like that. Atheists are not like that. People that don't have God in their life are not like that. Buddhists are not like that. So this idea that because we don't have God, therefore we're potentially sex fiends, is a form of fear. It's a form of mind control. It's basically saying that if you don't follow God, you could be a paedophile, or you already are a paedophile, but you need religion to stop yourself from doing it, which basically says that, because most paedophiles are men, it's basically an attack on men, that somehow all men are some sort of sexual predator, and it's absolutely not true. It's not helping the general public either, because there's already a war on men. In fact, there are some airlines in Australia which have banned men sitting next to children which are below certain ages if those children aren't accompanied. And that, to me, is something which is quite disgusting, that because I'm a man, I'm automatically suspected of someone that could commit a heinous crime. He goes on to say part of the physiognomy of the Revolution of '68 was that paedophilia was then also diagnosed as allowed and appropriate. Well, I'd like to say that it didn't all happen in 1968 because of some rock music. I'd like to say that paedophilia has been existing in various institutions, especially the Catholic Church, for a very, very long time. In fact, the Catholics seem to have, at the highest level, huge problems with their libidos. All we need to do is look at the Borgia Pope, who had many a sex orgy and also killed quite a few cardinals. And it was also another man's wife that killed a pope because that pope happened to be sleeping with his wife. And why did the sex revolution have to happen? The sex revolution had to happen because sex was repressed. Who repressed sex? Could it have been the Roman Catholic Church, as well as other religions out there? And what happened when the sex revolution tried to liberate the sex libido of man? The Catholic Church said that this caused paedophilia. Basically, the Catholic Church is saying that a liberated sexual person has the potential of being a paedophile. What rubbish. Pope Benedict goes on to say, the matter begins with the state-prescribed and supported introduction of children and youths into the nature of sexuality. Or someone's got to do it. If you leave it up to the media, they all start to dress as if they're on a beach. In Germany, the then Minister of Health, Ms. Strobel, had a film made in which everything that had previously not been allowed to be shown in public, well, in the tribes it was, including sexual intercourse, in the tribes it was now shown for the purpose of education. What at first was only intended for the sexual education of young people, consequently was widely accepted as a feasible option.
And please don't forget, sex is disgusting.
It was the church that made sex dirty. It was the church that, when they Christianized people, made people put clothes on, as if putting clothes on was part of God's great idea. I mean, God did make men naked. I mean, when you're born, you don't come out with a suit on. You come out with a birthday suit, but nothing else. And when the Christians went and Christianized people in Africa or Australia or Latin America, one of the first things they did was to put clothes on people. Why did they do that? Because the human body was dirty. People have sex, and children sometimes see their parents having sex. It's the parents' responsibility to educate the children. But parents get embarrassed of educating their children. They don't want to. Why have parents become embarrassed of educating their children in sex health? Why has that happened? Because parents have seen sex as something dirty as well. Who's put that into their heads? It's the Roman Catholic Church. It's society in general. But society in general is actually based on Christianity in the West. It's us that have become perverted. I do agree with the sex education. I think that sex education doesn't give a whole idea or concept of what sex is. Sex exists on different dimensions: physical, mental, and emotional. It also exists on an energetic level. And sex education is just taught on a physical level. You're just taught about the techniques or the physicality and the mechanics of it, plus also disease, which is also a physical thing. But on a spiritual level, it's never taught. If you look at the Buddhists and the Hindus, they talk about tantric sex, which is where you can manipulate energies of yours and the other person's in order to reach some sort of spirituality or to get closer to God. Through sex, you can get closer to God. But the Catholic Church, because it fears sex so much, it won't allow you to do that. The Catholic Church fears women. It fears nudity. That's why they clothed all the indigenous. They fear women. That's why there are no popes. They fear sex. That's why it's suppressed. He goes on to say, I have always wondered how young people in this situation could approach the priesthood and accept it with all its ramifications. The problem is that people did accept the priesthood with its ramifications. Accepting the priesthood was a way of being protected for engaging in paedophilia, because the Roman Catholic Church for centuries, not since the 1980s, for centuries has been covering up paedophilia and has been engaged in paedophilia. Pope Benedict goes on, at the same time, independently of this development, Catholic moral theology suffered a collapse that rendered the Church defenseless against these changes in society. Well, obviously the moral philosophy and doctrines and dogma of the Catholic Church weren't strong enough in order to stand up against sex, the sex revolution and rock and roll. I mean, is rock and roll and sex really that dangerous to the Catholic Church? Why is it that the Catholic Church is so threatened by those things? Well, because it wakes you up, because it frees you, it allows you to be free. And the Catholic Church can't allow people to be free, because if people are free, they won't believe in the dogma of the Catholic Church. So there needs to be a suppression of what those things are. Also, some of the ideas that Catholic Church put forward, like original sin, and women being blamed for man's downfall, and especially Jesus levitating, the ascension of Jesus when he levitates into a cloud to judge the living and the dead, to sit at the right hand of the Father. Did he really do this? Was that something that was added later to the Bible? Is this a little bit of an embarrassment? So there are certain things in the Bible which people sort of, they sort of shake their heads, is that really true? And the Bible itself is full of contradictions. There are many bits of the Bible that say you can stone and kill people for idolatry, homosexuality, or whatever else it wants. And then it's got the 10 Commandments which say thou shalt not kill. The whole book is a big contradiction, and people, they don't want contradictions. Benedict goes on to say, until the Second Vatican Council, Catholic moral theology was largely founded on natural law, while sacred scripture was only cited for background or substantiation. In the Council's struggle for a new understanding of revelation, the natural law option was largely abandoned, and a moral theology based entirely on the Bible was demanded. Okay, so the ideas and concepts they had prior to the Second Vatican Council weren't working. Well, if they weren't working, it means that they weren't right. Natural law in itself is ridiculous. So natural law, being a priori and deontological, says that the first action that you do can't be a sin. If you kill someone, that's a sin. If you kill someone to prevent that person from killing other people, that is a sin. You can't do that. So if someone is going to go and kill lots of people, and you can stop that person, the only way you can stop that person is by killing, you're not allowed to do that. That is natural law. And of course it doesn't work. It's ridiculous. It's inept. And people aren't stupid. People are logical. People have a natural wish to defend their children's lives, and they will kill to go and do it. Mothers kill, animals kill. It's inbred into us. So to start making us go against our nature, natural law actually makes us go against our nature, is a perversion. It's a perversion of spirituality. He goes on to say, the mental collapse was also linked to a propensity for violence. That is why sex films were no longer allowed on airplanes, because violence would break out among the small community of passengers. And since the clothing of that time equally provoked aggression, school principals also made attempts at introducing school uniforms with a view to facilitate a climate of learning. What airlines were showing sex films? What do you determine as a sex film? Are you telling me that there was an orgy going on over Saudi Arabia in the 1960s because some airline decided to put a porno flick on? I don't think so. Are you telling me that the fights that were started on the airplane were for the cubicle? Or was it because someone ran out of Kleenex and they were fighting over someone else's? What was going on? No, that's not what was happening.
We're going to watch a video called Man Watched Violent Child Porn on Delta Flight. No one cared. And that's outrageous.
And the idea that you need to change the dress of a child, or you need to tell the child how to dress in order to control their behavior so that they can be more, so that this can facilitate their learning. What learning? What education? Education is a form of programming. It's a form of developing a perception of reality that makes them more docile to the rules and obligations that the society puts in front of them, telling them that that's what society needs to be. Benedict goes on. The extensive collapse of the next generation of priests in those years and the very high number of locations were a consequence of these developments. No, they weren't. You assume, Benedict, that people weren't going to the Catholic Church because they were getting lost, not because the doctrine of the Catholic Church was wrong, which it is. Benedict goes on to criticize a seminary in Germany where trainee priests and lay ministers lived together. He says, at the common meals, seminarians and pastoral specialists ate together. The married among the laymen. The laymen would be people that didn't have the same rules and conditions as a priest, sometimes accompanied by their wives and children, and on occasions by their girlfriends. The climate in this seminary could not provide support for preparation to the priestly vocation. The Holy See knew of such problems without being informed precisely. Part of priest training is to deal with life. That's what you're doing as a priest. You're going to lead people. What's the point of leading people if you're going to be led astray? If you're going to be a leader, you've got to be strong. If you're going to be strong, then you need to be taught well. And the Catholic Church isn't teaching people well. If you look at the Buddhist and the Hindu traditions, they use different practices in order to curb the sex problem through meditation, breathing, and visualizations. The Catholic Church, because it is impotent, because it is unknowledgeable about spiritual sciences, it doesn't know how to teach the people properly. The second point is that the Catholic Church was never supposed to have priests without wives. At the beginning, priests did have wives, they had families, and they had children. The reason why priests weren't allowed wives after a while, especially children, is because the Catholic Church didn't want the money and the land and the houses that those people had going on to the next generation. They wanted that to go into the church coffers. So it was more a monetary rule than it was a spiritual rule. And in fact, people that do have wives, I think, are more spiritual than people that don't. There's this false illusion that in order to be spiritual, you have to give things up. You don't have to give things up. You have to understand what things are. You have to understand not to become attached to reality. The best people, how can a priest understand what a parent goes through if a priest doesn't have children? How can a priest understand what a marriage is if a priest doesn't have to deal with a wife or a husband? So there is a huge lack of understanding within the priests because they don't encounter life. If you don't encounter life, then you can't teach people about life. Benedict recalled one bishop who arranged for the seminarians to be shown pornographic films, allegedly with the intention of thus making them resistant to behavior contrary to the faith. Where do I start? That in itself just shows that priests don't understand. They don't have the technology. They're out of date and they don't understand spirituality. Spirituality is a mystical idea, it's a mystical concept, and there are ways of training in it. As I've mentioned, if they don't know what they are, then they shouldn't be teaching.